Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We'll begin in just a few seconds as we give everyone a chance to connect to their audio. All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's San Francisco Interfaith Council's weekly online briefing for faith leaders. Today's topic, the American Red Cross Bay Area's response to COVID-19 and other disasters. This session is hosted by the San Francisco Interfaith Council and supported by the Joint Information Center of the San Francisco COVID Command Center. Some housekeeping for today. Audio, video, and chat will be monitored and recorded for record keeping, training, and quality assurance. By default, all participants will be muted and video turned off to minimize distractions. For chat, to submit a question or comment, select the chat button at the bottom of your screen and send a message to Q&A. They will be shared with the speakers and panelists after the meeting for response. Thank you. Get tested, San Francisco. You can save lives and stop the spread of COVID-19 by getting tested through your healthcare provider. If you don't have health insurance or can't get tested through your provider, visit sf.gov/gettestedsf or call 311 for information on getting tested at a city-run testing location. A safe and effective COVID-19 vaccine coupled with continued preventative measures are our best tools to end the COVID-19 pandemic and safely reopen San Francisco. Go to sf.gov/COVID vaccine for information on eligibility, vaccination sites, including locations and links to book appointments if available. Now is the time to come together, San Francisco. We've been through so much in the last year. Together, we can stop Asian discrimination, bias, hate, and violence. The COVID-19 virus has no race or nationality. It is simply a disease. To report a hate crime, please contact the San Francisco Police Department at 415-553-1133. And a special note that the San Francisco Interfaith Council is a sponsor of this program. And now at this time, I'd like to hand the floor over to the Executive Director of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, Michael Pappas. Michael, the floor is yours.
Lisa, thank you so much. And we thank the entire team over at the COVID Command Center's Joint Information Center Virtual Outreach team for not only providing the platform, but for the expertise that you have brought to this series. This is, I believe, our 52nd program briefing that we are hosting collaboratively, and we are eternally grateful because the service that's been provided here has enabled our faith leaders in San Francisco and the heads of our religious institutions to make informed decisions on behalf of those entrusted to their care. Good morning, I'm Michael Pappas, and on behalf of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, I want to welcome you to this week's online briefing for faith leaders. The American Red Cross Bay Area chapter serves nearly 4.5 million people across the counties of Alameda, Contra Costa, San Francisco, and San Mateo, providing relief to those impacted by disasters and empowering the community to prepare for, respond to, and recover from emergencies. Its volunteer network of more than 3,000 youth, adults, and seniors, combined with community partnerships, local government, and donors, allow the Red Cross to provide critical lines of service within the Bay Area. This week's online briefing, hosted by the San Francisco Interfaith Council and supported by the COVID Command Center's Joint Information Center Virtual Outreach team, welcomes American Red Cross Northern California Coastal Region CEO, Jennifer Adrio, who will present on the pandemic's impact on the organization, its ongoing relief work, as well as the role the Red Cross has played in the region's COVID-19 response efforts. And without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to welcome the chairman of the board of the San Francisco Interfaith Council and executive director of the Shanti Project, friend and colleague Kaushik Roy, to offer a greeting on behalf of our board and to read the opening interfaith statement. Kaushik, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Michael. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kaushik, and on behalf of the Board of Directors, it is my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to everyone. I want to give a special thanks to our staff. Michael, welcome back. I hope you had a good birthday vacation, but you and your partner in crime, Cynthia Zambucas, continue to do incredible amounts of work and incredible work. So I want to make sure on behalf of not just the council, but the entire community, we extend our gratitude to you. I'm also really looking forward to this morning's very important conversation. If any of you have ever been a part of an interfaith event or somewhere where a Hindu monk or Hindu representative is asked to share something from the Hindu faith, you will have noted that almost inevitably, whatever they say, they will end with a particular word, shanti, which means inner peace, and they will almost inevitably say it 3 times. And there is a specific reason for that. It is because, according to Hinduism, we have 3 sources of our suffering. The first, of course, is the suffering we cause ourselves, coming from us. The second is the suffering from other sentient beings, the suffering other people or animals may cause us. And then the third one, of course, is what the insurance companies would call acts of God, what we can call Mother Nature, perhaps, or disasters, but definitely the one it often feels like we have the least control over. And that is what we're addressing today. So I want to give a special thanks to all of our guests, Jennifer from the Red Cross and everybody else who are going to be guest panelists. I know the Bay Area does so much more than other communities to be prepared, and we are fortunate to be as prepared as possible for whatever may come in the future. If you are joining us for the first time, I want to give a special welcome to you. I encourage you to make sure this is not your last time. We are as strong as our community, and I hope you will come back. At the beginning of every Interfaith Council event or meeting, we do have an interfaith statement that we like to read. It's just a way to take a moment and remind ourselves why we're all gathered here together. This is an interfaith community. Whatever our individual belief, it can be freely expressed here with no apologies. If we are invited to offer a prayer in this setting, it should be offered according to the tradition with which we identify. If we are invited to speak on a subject from the perspective of our tradition, we are free to do so without fear of offending those who come from another tradition. We come together as people of faith to learn from each other that we might better understand the multiplicity of faith traditions in our city and in our world. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you, Kaushik, and thank you for your sustained and inspiring leadership. You've gone above and beyond the call of duty and have been with us nearly almost every one of these 52 briefings to bring the presence of our board and the greater community. So we are grateful for your leadership. It's a joy and a privilege to welcome today Major Matthew Madsen, who is the Divisional Secretary for the San Francisco Salvation Army. Was quite intent. He's going to be doing double duty today because he will also be a faith panelist, but I was very intentional in asking him to offer today's reflective moment because since 2008, the San Francisco Interfaith Council has been convening the CEOs of the major faith-based social service agencies. Collectively, these agencies who have been in San Francisco, many of them for well over a century, have been providing the social safety net for the most vulnerable residents in our city. And they have selflessly been what I call boots on the ground, doing the real work. And so we are very grateful to Major Matt Madsen for being with us today. And at this point, invite him to offer a reflective moment and ground us for the presentation that will follow.
Thank you, Michael. It's a privilege to be able to share with you folks this morning. And I want to talk a little bit about my family for the next few minutes. My wife and I, we moved here back in July of 2019. Our experience here in the Bay Area has been mostly under COVID, so we're not sure what normal is around here. But we have 2 teenagers at home. And anyone with school-age kids knows how challenging this pandemic has been, especially as it relates to school and how they're doing and what they're doing. And having your world reduced to a small electronic screen has a way of creating this pseudo nearsightedness where we can't see beyond ourselves and those things in our immediate control. And as the virus raged on, the economy began crumbling, civil unrest sprouted up. Many were feeling helpless and hopeless. And because the world had suddenly become so much smaller, there was little that they could do about so many things happening in the world outside their walls. The disconnect became even greater as they retracted even more. And my wife and I, we saw what was happening and we knew we needed to do something. See, during the day, we would be serving meals to those without a home, only to return to a home with kids who were losing hope. And that's when we decided as a family we'd begin a study together. We began comparing what was being taught at school with what the Bible says about things such as creation and the Big Bang and the value of life and nature of truth. There's so much to look at. It really was some great discussion and engaged all of us in many ways we never expected. But rather than looking down at our problems, we began to look up, quite literally towards the sky. We gazed upon the stars. Now, we live in the Daly City Pacific area, and you don't see the stars very often, but when you do, we were able to look up. And I want to share with you from Psalm 19, where the psalmist wrote, "The heavens are telling of the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of his hands. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night reveals knowledge." As a family, we realized the only way we were going to come out of the pandemic without having significant issues and loss would be through looking up, looking beyond ourselves, beyond our computer screens, beyond our walls, beyond our own circumstances. And by looking up, we were provided with perspective. And I'm going to close with a familiar psalm, one that is often used in times of crisis and loss. And I'm going to share this because it truly provides that much needed perspective. And I think we all are familiar with Psalm 23. It's so well known, but this provides perspective. The Lord is my shepherd. And I believe Jesus is the good shepherd. I shall not want. That talks about provision, God's provision. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. This talks about God's peace. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. This speaks to God's providence. And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. This speaks to God's presence. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. This speaks to God's protection. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And this speaks to paradise one day. So in this one psalm, we are comforted by God's provision, God's peace, his providence, presence, protection, and one day, paradise. By looking up, the rest of the world seems to make a whole lot more sense. God bless you.
Thank you, Major Madsen, and thank you for your partnership and your work with us as a partner in disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. The Salvation Army has been just an incredible support to our work, and we look forward to continuing in that partnership. Jennifer Adrio is the Regional Chief Executive Officer for the American Red Cross Northern California Coastal Region Bay Area Chapter. I want to say, Major Madsen, I think that you and Jennifer arrived probably about the same time. And I remember going over to the Red Cross to greet her because the San Francisco Interfaith Council actually was born out of two crises, the homeless crisis in San Francisco and the Loma Prieta earthquake. And so it's in our DNA and a core mission to do disaster work. And the Red Cross has been an incredible partner with us. We've hosted since Loma Prieta every other year disaster preparedness workshops for congregations. And I have to make a confession, Jennifer, when I started this job 14 years ago, I knew that we were going to have to face a disaster. But in my mind, it was going to be the big one, the earthquake. And I have to be honest with you, I was saying, well, if we're going to be isolated for 72 hours, how are we going to communicate with one another? I never imagined that a pandemic would be the big one that for a year and a half plus that we would have to battle together. We've all learned a lot, and I'm sure you have learned a lot. The Red Cross has been historically in San Francisco and throughout the world an important player, if you will, in bringing relief in times of crisis. I was privileged to serve on their board, and I just want to welcome you, Jennifer, and give you this opportunity to talk about how the pandemic's impacted you all. I know that you are also battling other crises while you're battling the pandemic. So talk about all of it. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. It's wonderful to be here this morning. Yes, Matthew, you and I arrived probably about the same time. I started this role in July of 2019. So who would have thought, right, that we had a pandemic to face in front of us, in addition to learning our new area, learning our new volunteers, learning the new challenges, learning our new team, all those things. And then all of a sudden things changed for all of us. So it's been a pleasure to be here during this, and honestly to be part of this community and appreciate all the support. Salvation Army is a wonderful partner with the American Red Cross, as the Interfaith Council is, and all of our work is done through partnerships. So we just get to be part of wonderful work. And also I know that I have my colleague Allison Bittinger on the call with us this morning as well. I want to give her a shout out. She's our disaster program manager in the San Francisco area. So we appreciate everything Allison does as well. So thank you all. And I look forward to sharing what it's been like for the American Red Cross here in the Bay Area the last year or so, year and a half. And look forward to any other conversation today. So ready to start sharing our slides, Sharon. Thank you. So Michael and I had talked about what I kind of wanted to share this morning, and our role on the next slide, our mission, is to prevent and alleviate human suffering in the face of emergencies by mobilizing the power of volunteers and the generosity of donors. Emergencies like Michael was talking about. We've been talking about being prepared for the next big earthquake, or all the wildfire seasons that we have around here, or the daily disasters of responding to single family home fires or even multiple family home fires. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that I'd be part of a pandemic response. And so the beauty of the American Red Cross is really the last part of this mission statement, which is the power of volunteers and the generosity of donors. A lot of times people think the American Red Cross is part of the federal government, or we have special government funding and those kind of things. And we totally rely on our community support and our public support for the work that we do when we respond to disasters, and a majority of everything else that we do. And most importantly, really, is the power of our volunteers. I was with United Way for 25 years in between stints at the Red Cross, and I got to see lots of nonprofits at work, and lots of them using volunteers, but I've never seen anybody do it like the American Red Cross does. And 90% of our team is volunteers, and it's how we can actually supply the services we do and keep our overhead so low and respond to disasters across the country and across the world by really the generosity of our volunteers and the power that they bring. Ready for the next, Sharon. So Michael referred to kind of our region. I have an interesting role because I am the executive director of the Bay Area chapter, but I'm also the regional CEO for the Northern California coastal region. So I sometimes confuse which areas I'm talking about. But we do really work as a team in this region, and we work across regions, and we work across the country, and we work across the world. So our jurisdiction is, in chapter name, but our work really does go across all borders. And we're here to serve however we can serve, whether that's in our own backyard or whether it's sending people all over the country and all over the world, which we do all the time. And we're actually one of the best chapters as far as sending our folks out. They love to go out and help others, and we lead the country in being able to do that. Next slide, Sharon. So I'll kind of do an overview of what this last year has meant for us. And as we all think back to March 2020, it can seem like yesterday, or it could seem like forever ago. And I remember being in the Oakland office, and I was getting ready to go on TV to do an interview about a blood shortage and the need for blood, and got word that we were going to be shutting down and actually closing, and the community was closing, and we were all going to be going home. And of course, we had no idea what that was going to entail. And of course, I thought it'd be like for a week or two. And I thought about how am I going to eat, and I grabbed my computer and I went to the grocery store, and along with thousands of other people, and thought, what is this going to mean for us? Never crossed my mind that here we are over a year later and still working from home. But like I was talking about with our volunteers, we have 3,500 Red Cross volunteers in our Bay Area chapter, and they came together, and we figured it out. We've made lots of changes along the way that I'll share with you. Next slide. So one of the most important things that we do, and everything we do, of course, is important, but ensuring that we have a sufficient blood supply. The Red Cross supplies about 40% of all the nation's blood supply. Just a few facts. Every 2 seconds, someone needs blood. It's important to know that blood cannot be manufactured. It must come from volunteer donors. We have to rely on the generosity of our blood donors to be out there to donate blood. And we need to have blood on the shelf. We need to have it ready to go. We can't wait for an emergency to happen and then people start to donate blood. It takes days for it to be ready to be given to somebody. So we always need blood. It's constant. Every 2 seconds, someone needs it. What happened at the beginning is we made sure that blood donation became an essential work that needed to be done. Was one of the first things we worried about is, oh my gosh, are we going to get approved to draw blood? How will we do that? Well, one of the first things we did as a Red Cross was make sure that it was named as an essential service. On a typical day, our Red Cross would collect about 12,500 blood donations. This is around the country, and more than 2,700 platelet donations. I'm sure many of you are blood donors and platelet donors. But we had to do some really swift changes. Of course, we put the donation bed 6 feet apart. We began appointments only. We got the word out that blood donation was vital. And honestly, what we saw was people wanting to donate blood. And obviously, it was a way to also get out. I mean, I went and donated blood right away to see what the process was like, but also was an opportunity to feel like I was doing something semi-normal. But what we said is there can't be lines of people out, outdoors. You can't be waiting in groups. And so we went to an appointments only operation. And then of course we had to find all sorts of supplies and purchase all sorts of supplies and do retraining and things like that for our phlebotomist. Next slide, Sharon. So one of the things also that happened was, the places that we rely on blood donations, which is workplaces, schools, high schools are one of our biggest blood donations, colleges, all those places have shut down. And so all these blood drives that we had scheduled were canceled. And so we had to find new places to host our blood drives. And one of those became our office on Market Street, which now, this is a learning from the pandemic, we have now turned our offices in Market Street that will be a full-time blood donation center. It's been so successful, and we had all this space there. And so on August 2nd, we'll be opening a part of those offices to be a blood donation center. We use Zellerback Hall and the Kaiser Thrive City at Chase Center. Got a great partnership with Kaiser and the Warriors and opened a site there. Of course, donors thought they were going to get to come and meet the Warriors, and at some occasions we did have them there, but really it was just an additional site for us to allow people to donate blood there. And we reached out and engaged our local officials to help us share the word that blood donations were safe. It was a safe process and they were still needed. And so Senator Scott Wiener hosted a couple of blood drives for us. He had Mayor London Breed there donating blood in his name. We had Assembly Member David Chu that sponsored several blood drives for us. And then of course, our California State Surgeon General, Nadine Burke Harris, came out and actually did a video, and she did it at our Red Cross Center on Market Street to share about the promotion of blood and how important it was to donate. And, you know, end of the story is we've collected over 52,000 units in our chapter, and we were able to meet the demand in our community. So one of the other things that we've had happen through this wonderful last year is one of the worst disaster years on record for our region. We had historic wildfires. That lightning storm in August 16th started quite a fire and several fires and complex of fires. And we actually had 3 complexes of fires happening at one time in our region. We had 250,000 people that were evacuated, millions of acres burned, and we needed to supply the shelter, the meals, immediate support, along with our partners to help our communities. And we still have long-term recovery going as well. So to share a little bit about what that was like, it was a virtual response. So in the pre-COVID days, we would have an emergency operations center set up. We would have our leadership sitting in a room together. We would have thousands of feet on the street, having shelters, providing meals, driving around in emergency response vehicles, all of those things that were not going to be allowed during COVID. And so I sat here at my computer for, I think it was 95 days on a disaster response, as well as thousands of other volunteers. And we had as minimal people out in the field as possible. We had to do new training for our volunteers. And we had to really look at our local volunteers first. In a regular disaster season, Red Cross has volunteers that travel all over the country, and they have special roles and they have expertise, and we would normally start bringing people in. Well, that took travel, and we weren't doing travel as long as, and no one else was doing travel. So we said, okay, our local volunteers first have to respond, and then we have to find other local volunteers and do as much as we could locally. So we were doing boot camp training and getting people engaged as quickly as possible. We needed people to be out driving our vehicles and delivering meals to hotels and all these kind of things. And so we had lots of people coming out to help us that were not part of the Red Cross before, but now have become part of the Red Cross. It's one of the positive things that have happened from the pandemic, honestly, is our outreach and finding new volunteers that way. We did non-congregate sheltering. So you'll see a picture here of what a shelter would look like if we had to set it up with the cots 6 feet apart. But we worked with the state of California and our local partners and our hotels and our colleges and put people up into either hotel rooms or college rooms and did non-congregate sheltering. We opened temporary evacuation points. This is the first time that we've done this in the Red Cross with our emergency partners. And we would open evacuation points. So if people were leaving, they had a place to go to. They drove in their cars. They were checked in. We found out what their needs were. And then we would, send them to where we had a spot for them if they needed a spot, or refer them to other resources. And so that was the first time that we've done that. It was successful. We'll be doing that again this year. We actually were allowed to do a practice session in the Contra Costa area. and got that approved and work with our emergency partners to practice what a shelter operation would look like during a COVID environment. And like I said, we had volunteers from locally, but we had over 3,000 volunteers responding to this fire season. And we were able, with all of our partners, to supply almost 70,000 overnight stays, 70,000 overnight stays, almost 100,000 meals and snacks. And we've given out about $500,000 in financial assistance to families to help them on the road to recovery. We're actually now starting a long-term recovery program. So what happens to the Red Cross is if people donate more money, and specifically to the disaster, and more money than what we've spent, then we go back and do long-term recovery with those dollars. And so we have some additional dollars left over that we'll be working with partners to distribute throughout our counties that were affected by the wildfire season last year. And then, oh, by the way, on top of that, we were still doing our regular emergency response, which is about 1,200 families in our chapter that have home fires or other family disasters every year that we help respond to. On top of the response, we also do preparation and helping our communities to be more resilient. A resilient community, we can't stop disasters from happening. We can't stop acts of God, but what we can do is be better prepared and being resilient and teaching our communities how to respond. And so, changes for this upcoming season, we'll continue to work with our partners on the temporary evacuation points that I talked about. We will be opening congregate shelters as our communities get back to kind of life pre-COVID. There won't be hotel rooms. People are out traveling, so we won't have that opportunity. But we are ready to start the sheltering, and our volunteers are ready to start doing that. We've been doing virtual training to help people prepare for disasters. We have what's called a Be Red Cross Ready program. And we have a new partnership with our Cal OES partners in the MyShake app. If you don't have the MyShake app, it's about earthquake preparedness and letting us know that an earthquake is coming. And we've added that as a piece in our Red Cross Ready program to teach people about that. And we've reached over 2,400 adults in our community preparedness work and 400 children. One of the things that we usually do is in our school systems do what's called a pillowcase project, or Pedro the Penguin, which is teaching our children how to be prepared. And as schools shut down and we're virtual, we didn't really have the opportunity to do as much of that as possible, but we were able to offer some virtual training for our children as well. And the other thing we normally do is go door to door in canvassing vulnerable communities to talk to them about home fire safety. Actually, volunteers going door to door, meeting with families, helping them do preparedness activities, walking around their homes, looking for any fire hazards, testing smoke alarms, installing smoke alarms, teaching them how to be prepared for other disasters like earthquakes or wildfires, and helping them draw out really a safety plan. Of course, we weren't able to visit people in their homes, but we were able to do some of that virtually as well. The other thing we do, which some people are not aware of, but if you've been in the service, you are, we really support our service members and their families, and we continue to do that during the pandemic. In the Bay Area alone, we provide over 2,000 emergency and critical community services last year. We have a 24/7 answering service for families. If they have an emergency, they need to get a military member home to be part of that, or need to get a message, that has to be done through the American Red Cross. And we do that on an ongoing basis. And then we continue to support those families and things that they may need. We also support our homeless veterans. During the year, we supplied blankets and personal kits. We helped make masks for our VA facilities. And the other thing we do is restore family links, which is basically people who have been separated, families that have been separated through global violence or migration or disaster. We actually are able to connect them with each other. And we had 14 of those cases last year. and reach over 500 people through that same Restoring Family Links program. So as many of the other nonprofits and other organizations have done, we did do a lot of pivoting on what our mission was. And if we had our partners ask for specific things, we tried to meet those needs. We did some emergency food support, supplying volunteers to food distribution sites and several local food banks here in our area. We helped support COVID vaccine sites. We actually helped to set up the Moscone Center with one of our experts on logistics, because that's what we do, is set up responses quickly overnight. And so one of our logistics experts helped to set that up. And we supplied many volunteers through sites throughout our region if they needed volunteers. We also, across the country, launched a virtual family assistance center. So if people had family members, deaths, things that they needed outreach from, they were able to call our virtual family assistance center. In some cases, we were able to help with burial costs across the country, or just mental health or spiritual health through our volunteer system and support network. And then I had talked about our volunteers, and we definitely increased our workforce. We added 1,500 volunteers this year, just in our region alone, who actually put in hours and were engaged in our work. I could go on and on about the work of the Red Cross and our volunteers, but that's kind of an overview on some of the ways that we were able to respond during the pandemic. And, you know, the Red Cross is a huge organization, mostly volunteers, and I've been so impressed to see how we've been able to pivot and make changes and implement those quickly in a way that at the end of the day, we were still doing our mission, and we had to do it all differently. But we're able to do that because of the support of the community, our partners, and folks like you. So thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And as you were speaking, a couple of things popped up before we introduce our faith panelists. You spoke about the headquarters on Market Street in Goff. I remember one of your predecessors, Harold Brooks, a dear friend. In one telephone call and in one breath, he told me that you all had bought that building. He invited me onto the board, and he told me that he was moving on to the home office in Washington, D.C. But before he left, he asked the San Francisco Interfaith Council if we could offer an interfaith blessing for that new facility. And it was a memorable day. It was a day that I think was powerful, not only for our participants, but for the staff there. And I know all the good that happens there. And now to see that you've expanded and created a blood center is very heartening. Thank you.
We'd love to have you be part of that, part of our rechristening as well. So, yeah.
Absolutely. The other thing I wanted to mention to you is that, you spoke pretty extensively about the North Bay fires. And I want to tell you that during the North Bay fires, it really brought the interfaith councils of the region together with the Red Cross. We were getting calls from you all and Salvation Army, and also the Department of Emergency Management, wanting to know who my counterpart was, say, up in Sonoma County, as well as Marin, where the evacuees were presenting themselves. And we also were engaged in deploying chaplains up to those areas to help with the trauma that the evacuees were experiencing. And a special thank you to my friend John McKnight, who coordinated that. But I think that was really a recognition of how interdependent we are. And I know that my counterparts in Marin and Contra Costa County and Alameda County all want to spend some time with you and to enrich and cultivate that partnership with the Red Cross. So that said, we are very blessed to have with us today three amazing panelists who are engaged with you all and your work. And the first is Kat Alvarado, the project coordinator for Nico's Chinese Health Coalition. Kat, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you so much, Jennifer, for sharing all of the great work you've done for our community in the last year. I wanted to take a moment to introduce myself to everyone who is attending. My name is Kat Alvarado. I am a project coordinator for the Culturally and Linguistically Appropriate Services Advocacy, Consultation, and Training at Nico's Chinese Health Coalition, as well as the vice chair of the San Francisco VOAD, which stands for Volunteer Organizations in Disaster. My role at Nico's is focusing on enhancing equity and inclusion here in the city. These are principles that I really center throughout my disaster preparedness work as well, specifically within my own organization's Chinatown Disaster Preparedness Committee, as well through the San Francisco VOAD. And in my work, it is imperative that we continue to center our conversations of disaster response about equity. And this is because we often find that it is often communities of color and low-income neighborhoods that tend to be the hardest hit when it comes to natural disasters, and then also face the greatest barriers in accessing resources for safety and for rebuilding after a big event. So with that in mind, my question to Jennifer is, what are your strategies and what are some of your thoughts you can share around centering equity in disaster response? And how can we continue to ensure our most vulnerable communities receive the resources and care that they need?
Right, thanks for that, Kat. Yeah, equity is an important piece of what we try to do. So, you know, the principles of the American Red Cross, neutrality, impartiality, all those things are important to our work. How we engage people in that is a really key piece of it. So like one of the things we've started this year is a Latino engagement team, and reaching out to the Latino community specifically. What we find is specifically during disasters is that people don't always trust the Red Cross or trust any really organization, right? And so what we find is people in the community who have those relationships, when we partner with those who have those relationships, and we make sure that people know that the Red Cross services are there for everybody. And we go to those communities. And last year during the wildfire season, we had several events where we actually went into the communities that were underserved, made sure that they knew we were there, had folks that were volunteers from their community themselves to create that trust opportunity and share that we're there to serve everybody. So it's definitely a piece that's important to our work, and we constantly are trying to figure out ways to make sure that people do trust us and know that our work is there for all. We're also doing some community engagement outreach to the communities around the San Francisco area to let them know what the Red Cross does, but also to find out what their needs are and how we can better serve and communicate. So most recently, we had a conversation with the Chinatown leaders in Oakland about how we can be part of their community. So it's definitely key to our work and a priority for the organization. And I appreciate your question and learning more also about your organization.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And, you know, as part of our continued partnership, we'd love to continue to have this conversation about equity with you offline, even after this presentation. Of course, as I mentioned, we do have our own Chinatown Disaster Preparedness Committee based in San Francisco, Chinatown. And I would love to reach out to you and give you some more information about some of the work that we do.
That's great. Thank you.
Michael, you are muted.
Kat, thank you very much for that question. And just as a follow-up, if you'll permit me, one of the lessons that we interfaith councils learned during the North Bay fires and dispatching chaplains up there was that, you know, we were encountering very vulnerable people. And we realized that there's a necessity not only to vet, but to train chaplains going up into those situations to be culturally competent, but also sensitive to those that they're encountering. And I know that we're engaged right now with in our preparedness work to both vet and train potential chaplains going into those areas. I'm wondering if Red Cross has trainings for for folks going in terms of cultural competency and those necessities to minister to vulnerable people.
Yeah, we do have cultural competency training, and I'll connect with Allison afterwards too, and maybe we can provide some of that information on the information that you send out.
Absolutely. Why reinvent the wheel when we've got a partner that's been doing this for a while? So thank you both. Now we turn to Heather Lee, who is a program manager at SFCARD, Community Agencies Responding to Disaster. As Heather knows, the San Francisco Interfaith Council was the first fiscal agent for SFCARD back in the day. It's an amazing partner for us, with our limited capacity in hosting the disaster preparedness workshops. It's our intention and our vision to bring everybody to one room, but also then to steer them to SFCARD, speaking of trainings, to be able to prepare themselves, come up with disaster plans. Heather, you have been very busy during the pandemic. I know you reached out to us with your work with Listos. You've got a lot to say. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you at this point.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to try really hard not to babble on, as I often do, I love being invited to these. It really feels like it's been going on more than 52 or 54 weeks. On and on and on. On and on and on. Oh, gosh. And Jennifer, it's so nice to meet you virtually. I'm racking my brain if I met you in person or not, which is the case all the time anymore. For those of you on this that maybe don't know, SFCARD, we were just blessed during Listos. God works in all kinds of ways, mysterious or not. And we are an organization that helps other organizations prepare for disaster. We help them respond. We work with the VOAD. We try and help them recover. We're working on providing after action reviews with organizations. And we've survived through this COVID thing. We're starting to come out the other side. What are those lessons that we have learned that we can, implement moving into the future and not have to learn them twice? But back in 2019, we received a $2 million grant from the state of California to do preparedness work in San Francisco. It was a twofold pilot program. One was to develop and gather best practices for preparedness information in culturally and linguistically competent ways. It's not so early, I shouldn't be able to say that. And the second was to pilot moving state money directly to nonprofits, who then were charged with spreading that money to more nonprofits and kind of cutting out some of the it goes to the counties, it goes to the cities, and moving this really, we talked about trusted sources all the time. Thank you, Kat. I couldn't have had a better explanation or description of what that looked like to be culturally and linguistically competent. Nikos was one of our 29 total partners in doing this work in 2020. It's fingers crossed. It's sitting in front of the budget committee now that this work will continue, this funding will continue. And if so, I'm going to try and reach out to 29 more different new partners if that's something that we can do. I have, it's been a really interesting learning curve for me and experience to have funding to help support organizations during a disaster. That's not usually what we do. And I'm not even going to talk about the pivoting. Michael knows. everybody I think knows about the what's the latest health order? Now what do we do? But the question that I had for Jennifer is along the lines of volunteers. In case Jennifer didn't know, I think a lot of everybody else knows that I was a Red Cross volunteer. That's how I got into disaster. I was the disaster chair for San Francisco for a hot minute, having worked my way up the ranks. And I actually have a question about SB 5, which is that law that California passed about how you have to employ people in your main line of work. And this is something that we as a small organization, so I know this maybe affects small organizations more than something as established as the Red Cross means volunteers. But I'm just wondering if those requirements have changed the way that employed and volunteer staff work together, or what those tasks can be. Because as I look forward to, you know, what does coming out of this COVID shelter in place at home, and, you know, when we gather and we do that stuff again. And this is the thing that I have been thinking about for the last week, which is why I'm asking it.
And Heather, for those of us who don't know what SB 5 is, can you elaborate a little bit?
Yes.
Thank you.
SB 5 was a law passed by California that went into effect about the same time COVID did, which is why it's kind of been on hold, but kind of confusing, that says that organizations need to pay people as employees rather than as contractors, or possibly, I'm unsure around volunteers, if it is in their main line of work. It's one of those fixes that may have caused more problems than it solved around trying to get contract workers in the gig economy to have more security. But it's something that is starting to come back up as the economy starts to reopen, and what does that look like? And then I was curious about how that affects volunteer organizations, if that has an impact on them.
Well, it's a wonderful question that I don't know the answer to. I
don't either.
Yeah. So I don't know. We haven't had that conversation about how it affects us. So I can't help with that one.
Okay.
But I wrote it down. Thank you.
Something to look into.
Yeah.
Thank you, Heather.
Well, thank you for being a volunteer. It's fantastic.
I am on hold. I had some family issues, and then COVID, of course, and then, you know, the work that I've been doing. But I consider myself a Red Cross volunteer on hiatus right now. Not stopping that.
Good. Well,
wonderful.
We'll probably need you this year.
Our final faith panelist, again, I said he's doing double duty, is Major Matthew Madsen, Division Secretary for the San Francisco Salvation Army. Matt, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you again, Jennifer. And thanks for all the work that the Red Cross does. You guys, this country would be a different place without you. It really would. And we do appreciate it. You used the word resilient. And it was funny, I took the family to go to a Giants game. It was like our first outing out in forever. And we noticed that the theme for this year for even the Giants is resilient. And that's an important word, especially through this COVID-19. But it's an important word and an important concept when it comes to disasters, natural disasters. And being resilient is critical to kind of bouncing back. A lot of folks may not be familiar with the Salvation Army, our disaster response here in the city, because really the only disasters that we have here are when the massive earthquakes take place. But, you know, you go across the bay where all the fires are, we're always out doing fire relief and whatnot. We don't have much to burn here. So I want to know from you, if you could give just some pointers, being this being the Interfaith Council, we have a lot of congregational leaders and influencers and folks that can speak wisdom to the people that they know. What would you say are the most important elements that we need to be prepared at the family level and perhaps a congregational level, so that we're resilient? When you get on an airplane and they say, make sure you put the mask on you before you put it on the next person. How can we best be prepared so that we know we got things covered, and then we can help others?
It's a great question. And I even talked to my team about that with our offices and things like that. So it's like, everybody needs a go kit. Everybody needs one, especially here. And I think Governor Newsom, I've heard him say it probably the best about there's a ticket, a price you pay to live here, and that's called preparedness, because something's going to happen, right? And you don't know when or necessarily what specifically, but everybody needs a go bag. I have one in my car. You need to have one in your home. You need to have one in your office. And in those bags are things.
Mine's right here.
Oh, good. I'm so
Yeah,
glad to hear
yeah.
that. But yeah, it's like, we train other people to do those things, but if you don't do it yourself, that's nuts. Check your smoke alarms, for God's sake, right? Follow some of those easy things that we teach others and think, oh, it won't happen to us. Well, it could happen. And the other thing is, if you have a facility that you think could be used as a shelter, let us know, and we'd love to have an opportunity to look at your site. And then with that is training for your congregation on how to set up a shelter. You'd learn a lot through that process. So it's a way that the community can partner together. But that resiliency piece, whether it's go bags or whether it's taking the Be Red Cross Ready course, we can come to your congregation and do those trainings. All those things are available. I mean, it's a community service, and it's an important piece of, we live here, so we need to know, like, have shoes by your bed. I didn't live in earthquake territory, and I was here for probably, I think it was almost the night before the Loma Prieta, 30 years or something, and my whole bed started shaking, right? And I'm sitting there reading, and I'm like, oh my God, I think I'm in an earthquake. Well, luckily I had my flashlight, I had my shoes by me, all those things that I went, oh yeah, this is an earthquake, am I ready, right? So, you need to be prepared yourself, and then talk about that with others and make sure that they are as well. So it could be actually helping people to purchase a supply kit or that emergency kit. And actually on our Facebook page that was posted yesterday, we have one of our volunteers showing how to put together a kit.
I want to thank you for raising that point, because it reminds me of one of our disaster preparedness workshops for congregations. I remember seeing, I was out in the lobby of St. Mary's Cathedral, and a congregant at Beth Israel Judea on Brotherhood Way, she looked like she was just absolutely going to have a breakdown just by listening to the presentations that were being made. And I said to her, now, when you stand at the door of Beth Israel Judea, what do you see? And she says, I see Park Merced. And I said, yes, you do. And I said, guess what? Everybody in those buildings, should something happen, is going to be at your doorstep, because they believe that you have a moral obligation to provide shelter and food. I said, the fortunate thing is, though, that there are 7 houses of worship and schools on that street. And what we're trying to do as an interfaith council is get you to talk to your neighbors, see what resources you have, and come up with a plan together, because we know that those 72 hours we're going to be isolated. And so neighbors need to be talking to neighbors, and neighbors are going to be, especially congregations, are going to be needing to provide for what the expectations are. And better to do that in times where we're not in crisis than otherwise. And so as we emerge from this pandemic, we're going to be looking at wildfires. We're going to be preparing for other disasters. We believe that by congregations speaking to one another, that is a form of interfaith work. And so I would encourage those who are listening on today to heed that, and to reach out to your neighbors and to come up with a plan together, so no one congregation is going to be bearing the greater burden. That's my little sermonette. Thank you all. This has been an incredible conversation. I want to thank Jennifer for taking the time, the preparation, and for so eloquently making her presentation. I want to thank Kat and Matt and Heather for their contributions as well, and of course, Kaushik. We also, as we're saying thank you, I want to say a special thank you to Cynthia Zambucas from the San Francisco Interfaith Council, my right and my left hand, who helps with all of the technical preparations for these programs and briefings, as well as to the wonderful staff at the COVID Command Center, John McKnight, Trey Russell Allen, Alyssa Carawala, Sharon Walton, Hafisa Salabai, and Nick Marino, who are with us today. We invite you to join us in 2 weeks. We won't be having a program next week, but Thursday, June 17th, 2021 at 8:30, we will be welcoming experts from the San Francisco Department of Public Health's Public Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Team, who are going to brief faith leaders, focus now, on the seasonal hazards of extreme heat and wildfire smoke in these times of the COVID-19. So it'll be a great complement to today's program. We look forward to rejoining one another then. And that brings today's program to a close. Once again, thank you and God bless you.